Today, we're looking at a 3-part documentary script for Channel 14, The Truth Behind the Draft Law.
A very ambitious. It's trying to convince a pretty skeptical audience that this new 2026 Haredi draft law is actually going to work.
After 78 years of failures. So let's dive right in. The first major point is that the scripts lean very, very heavily on this one premise.
That financial incentive will just sort of effortlessly override decades of deep ideological resistance.
Exactly. It paints this picture of a purely rational actor, a homo economicus model.
Right. The argument is, if you threaten the yeshivas with these massive budget cuts, 50, even 100%, and hit individuals with losing their driver's license,
then the leadership just folds. They'll push the students to enlist.
But that assumes a kind of economic rationality that historically this community hasn't always followed.
Well, that's the thing. The script itself mentions the "we will die rather than enlist" mentality.
It does, and then it just glides past. The transition from that level of defiance to a total cooperation feels way too smooth. It just feels too easy.
The friction is missing.
Completely. I'm looking at chapter 3, and there's this one line that really stands out. It says, when a Rosh Yeshiva understands that the coffers will empty, he will no longer turn a blind eye.
It's presented as a certainty.
It is. It's a definitive prediction. And a skeptic is going to stop right there and ask, but will he? What if he cares more about the principle than the coffers?
What if they choose poverty?
We've seen it happen. Communities accepting really severe hardship to avoid what they see as, spiritual contamination.
So to make this whole argument more credible, the script has to acknowledge that it's a gamble. It's not a fact.
Yes. Frame it as the calculated risk the legislation is taking. Pose the question directly.
Will they choose funds or will they choose faith? And then argue why this time funds might win.
You could make a strong case. Maybe the community is just too large now to be sustained by charity alone. That's a much more compelling argument than just assuming the money always wins.
There's a similar problem with how it treats that slogan. The script says, the Haredi public is abandoning the outrageous slogan for a new reality.
It states it as a done deal, as if it's already happened, but the law isn't even fully in effect yet in the show's timeline.
It feels so premature. It's confusing the intent of the law with the actual outcome.
A simple fix would be to just frame it as the hope of the legislation. Something like, the law aims to replace the slogan of defiance with a new reality of integration.
It's a subtle change.
But it respects the audience. You can't tell them a slogan is gone when they can probably still see it on posters in the street. You lose all credibility.
And speaking of what you see in the street, I actually liked the laundry test idea.
It's a great visual anchor. Seeing uniforms on clotheslines in Bnei Brak.
It's powerful, but it also leaves a huge door open for counter-argument, evasion.
The underground yeshiva. Exact. If the pressure is purely financial, the logical countermove isn't just enlistment. It could be creating new institutes that completely reject state funding to get around the sanctions.
A black market for Torah study.
Yeah, and a skeptical viewer is absolutely going to think of that. So the script should get there first.
So you'd suggest contrasting the two images directly?
I would. Contrast the hope of the laundry test with the real threat of underground yeshiva. It shows the producers aren't naive. It shows they understand the complexity.
And it makes the argument that the state can eventually close those loopholes feel much more robust. It turns a simple prediction into a strategic analysis.
And that whole issue of evasion, of loopholes, it connects directly to the number.
Right. If people are trying to evade, how do you hit that magic number, that 8,160?
This is where the script invites the most suspicion about, cooking the books.
To its credit, Chapter 1 is brave enough to ask the question out loud.
It is. It says, is this a real change or a statistical exercise? And it brings up the official definition of a Haredi recruit.
Which is anyone who spent 2 years in an institution between ages 14 and 18.
And immediately alarm bells go off for them. The immediate fear is they'll just recruit the dropouts.
People who have already left the religious lifestyle, who live in Tel Aviv now, but technically fit the definition.
It's the easiest path to hitting a quota without actually solving the problem. And the script raises this fear, and then it just pivots.
It jumps to financial sanctions in Chapter 2 without ever closing the loop.
The connection is so muddy. It never explains how finding a yeshiva stops the army from counting a dropout who studied there 5 years ago.
Right, so what does the connection need to be? What has to be true for this to work?
Well, we need to know if the penalty is specific. Is Yeshiva X penalized because their specific students didn't draft?
Or is it based on some general national target being missed?
Exactly. If it's specific to the yeshiva, then the dropout loophole is at least partially closed. They can't rely on some other institution's dropouts to save them.
But if the sanctions are just based on a national failure?
Then the army actually has an incentive to go find dropouts wherever they can, just to avoid the political fallout of missing the target.
So the script needs to be explicit. Just add one line. If Yeshiva X fails to send its share of students, it loses funding, and dropouts from other cities won't save them.
And what if the law doesn't work that way? What if the loophole is real?
Then the script has to be honest about it.
It has to own it?
Yeah, it should say something like, the dropout loophole remains a valid criticism, but the sheer volume of the 8,160 target means dropouts alone cannot fill the rank. That's a defensible position.
Right. But ignoring it, or waving it away, just makes it look like a cover-up.
There's also this 25% target that gets mentioned in Chapter 2 as a threshold for sanctions.
And it's just thrown out there?
25% of what? Is it 25% of the students on the current roster, or is it 25% of all draft age men in that city?
The denominator is missing, and without that precision, the whole thing feels loose. If a listener thinks the definitions are fuzzy, they'll assume the success is fake.
It's funny because the script lacks precision there, but then it gets bogged down in way too much precision when it comes to the politics.
Oh, the inside baseball.
So much inside baseball.
It's a really jarring shift in focus. You're talking about this massive, historic, societal change, the laundry test, the future of the army, and then bam, suddenly you're in a committee room getting a roll call.
We get a list of MKs, Barran, Bismuth, Azulay, Usher. We get this detailed conflict with a legal advisor, Miri Frankel-Shore.
It just completely distracts from the core story. The audience wants to know if the law will work, not the detailed minutes of the meeting where they argued about a subsection.
Look at that section on the O2 or O3 rifleman training.
Right, for the 10% going into national service.
Does the audience really need to know the specific rifleman certification level? It's such a granular detail.
All they need to know is that an attempt to militarize national service failed. The O2 part is just clutter. It pulls you out of the big picture.
And that whole portrayal of the legal advisor Miri Frankel-Shore, it feels personal.
It does. The script says she chose not to extend her hand back. It frames a legal disagreement as some kind of character flaw or a personal vendetta.
But she's a legal advisor. She almost certainly had a constitutional or a jurisdictional reason for her position.
By leaving that reason out, the script just sounds partisan. It sounds like the writer is airing a personal grievance instead of documenting a systemic process.
The fix there seems pretty straightforward. Just strip the personality out of it.
Focus on the obstacle, not the person.
The attempt to toughen the law ran into legal hurdles regarding jurisdiction. Done.
And you can simplify the cast of characters, too. You don't need to list all 4 MKs.
No.
Just summarize it. A coalition Haredi Axis attempted to toughen the law but was blocked by legal advisors. That tells the story perfectly without making the viewer memorize a list of names.
Speaking of the politics, there's another point where the context feels, let's say, selective.
The comparison to the Bennett-Lapid government?
Yes. The script makes this big, triumphant point, comparing the current target of 8,160 to the 2022 target of 1,566.
And factually, the numbers are right, but context is everything.
The comparison feels intellectually dishonest because it totally ignores the elephant in the room.
October 7th.
This 2026 law exists in a world at war, a world with a severe manpower crisis. The 2022 law did not have that reality.
So comparing the numbers without mentioning the existential need that's driving them just looks like scoring cheap political points.
It frames the high number as a result of political ambition.
What it's really a result of grim necessity.
And the argument actually becomes so much stronger if you lean into that necessity.
Of course, frame the higher numbers not as some political victory over the last administration, but as a new reality that forced everyone's hand, including the Haredi leaderships.
There's a line in there that's pretty snappy. It says, actually, this 8,160 is not even the target Gaunt's hoped to reach in another decade.
It is a good line, but it lacks the weight of the moment.
So just add the context.
Yeah. Driven by the dire post-October 7th reality, the government was forced to set targets 4 times higher than any previous attempt. That grounds the numbers. It explains the why behind the jump.
It shifts the narrative from our politicians are better to our situation has fundamentally changed.
A skeptical viewer knows the war is happening. If the script pretends the war isn't the primary reason for these numbers, it just loses all credibility.
And along those same lines, there's that bit where President Herzog is praising Boaz Bismuth for his work on the committee.
It's pure fluff.
Total fluff. It's nice for the MK, I'm sure, but it does absolutely nothing to convince me that this law is going to work.
It's wasted screen time. Cut the praise and use that time to analyze the actual shortage.
The script mentions General Grob Khalifa saying the IDF needs 11,000 to 12,000 more soldiers.
That data point is the engine of the whole law. The general shortage report is the why. The president's compliment is just decoration.
So connect the dots for the viewer. Connect the 8,160 quota directly to the general's 12,000 soldier deficit.
Absolutely. And let's go back to the enforcement for a second. The script calls the sanctions draconian and aggressive.
A death blow if you miss the target.
Okay, so if the penalty for missing is a 50% budget cut, which is existential for a yeshiva, the incentive to cheat becomes massive.
High stakes create high corruption.
Exactly. If the sanctions are truly that deadly, you have to assume they will do anything to survive, including falsifying their student roster.
And the script really needs to address that. Is the system robust enough to handle that kind of pressure? Instead of focusing on Mary Frankelshaw's personal motivations.
It should be focusing on the auditors. Who is doing the counting? Who ensures that 25% target isn't being faked?
There's a throwaway line in Chapter 2. It says the system needs time to cross-reference data.
Right, and that sounds like an excuse, but it might actually be the single most important point in the entire enforcement section.
If the cross-referencing fails, the whole sanctions regime fails.
The script frames the delay as just organization time, but a skeptic hears bureaucratic incompetence is about to create a giant loophole.
So you expand on that. Add one sentence. The IDF, the tax authority, and national insurance are linking their systems to ensure no student can be counted twice or hidden.
It turns a vague excuse into a concrete mechanism that builds credibility.
It also helps with the overall tone. Right now, the tone is so triumphant.
Very. History is being made. The reality is changed.
It feels like a victory lap before the race is even properly started.
And if you're trying to convince a skeptic, that kind of unbridled optimism just sounds like propaganda.
You don't have to be pessimistic, but you do have to be cautious.
Instead of the reality is changed, maybe try something like, we are witnessing the beginning of a potential shift.
Because that laundry test footage is a projection of a possible future. It's not a recording of the present. If the viewer feels they're being sold a fantasy, they'll tune out.
But if they feel they're being shown a plan, with all its risks, rewards, and safeguards, they'll listen.
Which I think brings us back to the core recommendations.
The script is strong. It's got great data, a real historical sweep. It lays out the what very clearly. But to win over that skeptic, it has to nail down the how and the why.
Right. So first, it needs to actually validate the psychological friction in the heretic community, instead of just dismissing it as something money will solve.
Second, it has to close that logic loop on the dropout, make the statistics feel real and airtight.
Third, trim the political gossip. Focus on the legal outcomes, not the committee room drama.
And finally, put the numbers in their proper context, the reality of the war, not just political one-upmanship.
You do those 4 things, and this documentary stops preaching to the choir.
And it starts actually converting the skeptic.
We would invite you to submit the revised script once you've had a chance to tighten those loops and balance that optimism with a necessary dose of reality.
It's a really important story, and it deserves to be told with absolute precision.
Keep refining the work. We'll be here for the next draft.